Nestled right on the dusty, winding border of the Louisiana-Mississippi state line, about 50 miles inland from the pull of the river, the land shifted into thick, piney woods. Here, the air didn't carry the heavy humidity of the river deltas, but smelled of red, clay, pine needles, and open sky. In this rural clearing stood a small wooden church, and it was here that Tea Cake felt most at peace. She was a girl whose voice seemed to belong to the heavens itself. On Sundays, her soprano rang out the clearest, rising above the rustling pines and the rusty organ, soaring like a bird over the state line. But the history of the land was written in a tragedy that cast a long shadow, especially during the holidays. Tea Cake's grandfather had been a giant of a man, but he was taken from them violently long before she or Shayla were ever born. It happened around Christmas. He had been attacked with a knife and died at Old Charity in New Orleans. They knew the details now because technology let them see the death certificate on the web. It was a harsh reality to read. He had suffered for 3 days before succumbing to his injury. The certificate listed the cause as a fight, a word that raised more questions than answers. Because of this, the holiday season was never purely joyful for the family. Every Christmas, something haunted the girls. Something always went wrong, from fights amongst the brothers to confusion with the sisters. And if not on Christmas, it happened close to it. It was a lingering darkness that hovered over the festivities. When the girls got old enough to understand, they started asking questions about that night in New Orleans and the fight that took their grandfather. The reaction was immediate and cold. People started turning on them. The tight-lipped community, determined to keep the past buried, shunned them for digging up secrets better left alone. Despite the community's rejection and the heaviness of the past, the family line itself was strong. The grandfather's death left a void, but grandmother was left to raise her family alone, and she did so successfully. Her children grew into pillars of the community, cooks whose gumbo could heal the soul, tailors who stitched fine suits, truck drivers who hauled freight back and forth across the state lines, and servicemen who marched with pride. Among all the successful siblings, however, there was one who held a special place in everyone's heart. The baby of the family, the favorite uncle. He was the light of the grandmother's eye, and the cool uncle who always had a story. But as Tea Cake and Shayla grew older, the shadows of the past lengthened. Tea Cake was often a solitary figure in that choir stand. While she had a gift, she was a loner by nature, preferring the quiet solitude of her grandmother's porch, which sat far from the river's traffic. Her immediate home life was a burden. She lived with 2 brothers and a sister who, blinded by jealousy and perhaps fear of the family history, treated her like an outsider. They mocked her quiet ways and her deep connection to the spiritual, doing everything they could to break her spirit. Every Friday evening, however, the silence would be broken. That was when Shayla arrived. Shayla lived in Baton Rouge, a drive that took her away from the city lights and deep into the rural piney woods. She was Tea Cake's favorite cousin, and while she was a city girl, her heart was anchored on the state line. 2 years younger, bubbly, and overflowing with love, Shayla was the warmth to Tea Cake's cool reserve. While Tea Cake carried the melody with precision, Shayla provided the harmony, her voice rich with genuine affection. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel seen just by smiling. Their bond was cemented by 2 things: music and pizza. Shayla's dad managed a popular pizzeria in Baton Rouge. He would load up his car with stacks of pizza boxes, pepperoni, extra cheese, and everything in between, and drive north until the pavement turned to gravel in Grandma's driveway. They would sit on the back porch, surrounded by the sounds of the woods, eating slice after slice, folding them in half the New York way, talking about everything and nothing until the cold air drove them inside. Tea Cake loved these weekends. She would retreat to Grandma's house to escape the coldness of her siblings and the neighbors who had turned against them, and Shayla was the only one who ever came to visit her there. While Tea Cake's brothers and sister wanted nothing to do with her, Shayla would show up every Saturday and Sunday morning, ready to pull her cousin into the light. Sunday service was the highlight, but it was also a battlefield. The head usher at the little wooden church was Tea Cake's aunt, a woman with a face like a clenched fist. She hated the bond between the girls and seemed determined to silence their questions, just as the town had. She didn't just glare at them, she pinched them hard. Whenever Shayla leaned over to whisper something encouraging or squeeze Tea Cake's hand during the service, the aunt would march down the aisle and dig her fingers into their arms. 2 pews apart, she would hiss, trying to enforce a strict separation. You girls are too distracting. Sit apart and be quiet. Tea Cake's siblings, sitting nearby with smirks on their faces, loved this. They joined the aunt's efforts to punish the girls by keeping them away from each other. But the bond was resilient. Even separated by rows of wooden pews, Tea Cake and Shayla would catch each other's eye, sharing a look of love that infuriated the aunt and the siblings. Despite the family's cruelty and the town's rejection, Tea Cake was protected by her gift. She wasn't just a singer. She was a songwriter for the Most High Yahs. The songs she wrote were anointed, carrying a spiritual weight that acted as a shield. Every time her siblings, the aunt, or the neighbors tried to trip her up with hexes, lies, or shunning, the words Tea Cake penned and sang seemed to neutralize their attacks. When they weren't navigating church politics or the cold shoulders of the community, they were at the skating rink in the nearest town. Friday nights were sacred. Tea Cake was graceful on wheels, gliding backward to the rhythm of the gospel disco beats. Shayla was right there with her, spinning and laughing, her joy radiating outward like a beacon. "Isn't this beautiful?" Shayla would shout, skating circles around Tea Cake. Because Shayla was younger, she was the recipient of all of Tea Cake's hand-me-downs. It wasn't a burden, it was a treasure. Tea Cake would grow out of a pleated skirt or a soft cardigan, and within a week it would appear on Shayla in Baton Rouge. Shayla wore them with pride. Their birthdays were both in January, a time when the air in the piney woods was crisp and biting. They called themselves the Winter Babies. For years, they spent every birthday together at Grandma's house, surrounded by the smell of Grandma's famous chicken and dumplings and Shayla's dad's pizza boxes. But as they grew, the darkness in the family deepened, fueled by the secrets surrounding the grandfather's death. The aunt, steeped in jealousy and dark arts, began sending powerful hexes Tea Cake's way. Tea Cake would wake up with night terrors. The lights in the old house would flicker. Her throat would swell shut before solos. The hexes always felt stronger near Christmas, as if the grandfather's trauma was stirred up by the date. The cruelty peaked when it was time for Tea Cake to claim her inheritance. The grandfather had left a parcel of the family land, the very land Grandma's house sat on, straddling the state line, for Tea Cake's education, a trust set up long ago. But the aunt, exploiting the family's secrets and her position, had stolen the inheritance through forged deeds. It seemed she was determined to bury Tea Cake, just as the truth about the grandfather had been buried. Tea Cake's siblings sided with the aunt, hoping to force Tea Cake off the land for good. The pressure broke Tea Cake's spirit. When they turned 18, the winter babies tradition broke. It was a cold January. Tea Cake, drowning in the depression of the hexes, the theft, and the community's betrayal, spent her 18th birthday alone on the porch. She stopped singing. She stopped writing music for the Most High, yeah. But the spiritual realm would not allow the darkness to win in that old house. One night, as Tea Cake sat in the silence of Grandma's parlor, the air grew heavy with the scent of rain and sweet magnolias, a scent that didn't belong in the piney woods. She looked up, and there, shimmering in the corner near the fireplace, was her grandfather. He didn't look like a scary ghost. He looked solid and calm, the scars of the past gone. He didn't speak, but his presence flooded her heart with peace. He walked to the desk where she kept her journal and touched her pen. The message was clear. Pick it up. Write for Yah. They can't kill what he has anointed. Encouraged by her grandfather's ghost, Tea Cake began to write again. The songs poured out of her, weapons of warfare against the ants' hexes and the town's silence. The real turning point came when their preacher, Reverend Silas, got involved. Reverend Silas was a tall man with a voice like thunder who knew the ways of the border community. Guided by the Spirit, he walked into Grandma's house with a briefcase. He sat Tea Cake down and told her that her grandfather had confided in him before he passed at Old Charity all those years ago. The old man hadn't trusted his sister, so he had asked the